Tiny Glade totally surprised me. Hey everyone, my name's Smitty, and today I'm going to be diving into the new cozy building game, Tiny Glade. It is spooky season, so today's project will have a certain eerie quality to it, but I'll be showing this build from start to finish, and you'll see how I transform this peaceful glade into a spooky but charming town. As always, a big thank you to all you awesome patrons who continue to support the channel, and wishing you all a very spooky October. Hope you all enjoy, and without further ado, grab a snack, grab a drink, let's get right into it. I started out this project by doing some basic terraforming. The idea here was to set up a scene of a spooky castle on a hill overlooking a rundown village, so I spent some time carving that into the landscape. Doing the terraforming at the beginning of the build just helps me understand the flow of the scene and visualize where things will go. In my mind, I was thinking castle on the hill, a town below, and then maybe a haunted church and graveyard in the near corner. I started out by working on the town. At this point, I was still learning the Tiny Glade build system, so I thought that working on these smaller, bite-sized homes could help me grow my confidence with the game's tools. The goal was to make this town look a bit disheveled and old. Not totally abandoned, but certainly years past its zenith. So I definitely went with a darker color palette to fit the theme. Something that this game does really well is that it's really easy to experiment with different ideas and tweak things to your liking. The click and drag system feels really intuitive, and it allows me to easily try different building compositions and layouts without taking too long, which is really helpful. When it comes to detailing, initially I was a little worried if Tiny Glade would have a deep enough system for decorating. While I think there is some room for expansion of options, I must say I was pleasantly surprised with how you can leverage certain assets and procedural systems to deliver more details. In particular, I found that the fences and stone walls were quite versatile. Once you have mastery of how to elicit the different textures from these assets, there's actually a lot more depth and optionality with these pieces, which is really helpful. One of the quickest and most satisfying ways I found to make ruins is to block in shapes and then use the eraser tool to slice it up. This converts the building into a stony ruin type texture while keeping the general suggestion of its original shape. Next, I wanted to work on a larger multi-component structure. I thought this next building could be a town tavern near the water, or maybe the townsfolk and fishermen on the lake would stop by, or at least they used to. For this town, I tried my best to make each building just a little bit different from the last, and I tried to plot the decorations out in a very organic way, making sure things weren't too gridded. Next up, I wanted to build a town hall. I wanted this structure to stand out a bit more, so I made sure to implement a little more verticality. For instance, I really like the idea of having stone staircase winding up to the entrance versus just having it on the ground floor, so I took some time to lay those out piece by piece. This also made the build have a nice compositional flow from the stairs to the entrance, then to the tower above, and I really liked the layout. For Tiny Glade's space is somewhat limited, so I didn't want to expand my town too far and leave little room for the rest of the project. Just added some final homes and decorations, and the town to be complete. With my town finished, I was really happy with the overall vibe. Definitely felt like an old, dilapidated town, and the color palette really gave it a nice spooky charm to it. Still getting used to the build system, but at this point, I can definitely see the potential. At this point, I was feeling a little more warmed up and ready to take on something new in the project. I thought for this corner, a church with a surrounding graveyard would fit perfectly for the scene. I started out by blocking the foundation for the church. My thought here was to have much steeper, more dramatic roof angles, and then also set a steeple in the back. Once the church structure was complete, I started working on the surrounding graveyard. For this, I would just draw some lines with the wall tool, and then use the eraser to cut it down into what would eventually be lines of gravestones. I would then go back over each of the stones and add some variability in the heights and positioning just to ensure it looked more organic. I would also add some smaller tomb structures to the landscape just to fill out the scene a little bit more. With the church and graveyard complete, I was really pleased with how well it fit the theme. The surrounding graveyard really gave a nice spooky context to the build and felt very natural and fitting for the town. Alright, at this point playtime was finally over, and it was time to take on a real challenge. I had set this part of the project for the end partially because I needed to acclimate to the build system, but also because I didn't really have a clear vision for what I wanted it to look like yet. First I started with the gate. I decided it would be cooler if the castle was connected by a bridge instead of a slope, so I painted in some water to make it more of an island, and then connected it with the stone bridge with an arch below. From here, I would continue working on the gatehouse, making sure that the path continued through the structure, and then worked on my first tower, trying my best to incorporate a lot of depth and layering into the spire. Happy with these first couple of components, I then decided I would just go ahead and block in the outer wall of the castle, just so I had a better idea of the space I had to work with and where my other spires would go. Next, I took some time to build all the towers of each of the circular nodes I had mapped out. Rather than just keeping everything uniform in the same pattern, I thought it would look better and more interesting if each tower was unique. So I made sure to vary the design, composition, and size of each one. If you're not careful, towers can end up kind of boring and one-dimensional, so you see that the construction of these are a combination of quite a few different components to add layering and depth to each structure. With the towers done, I was feeling much better about the direction of the castle. I was really happy with how they turned out, and they looked quite intricate and unique, and my path forward seemed much more clear at this point. Moving on to the inside of the walls, I wanted to keep a small space open for a courtyard, using the large tree as a focal point, but still needed a box and some main castle structures to fill out the center. I started with the main keep in the middle, laying in multiple layers of walls and structural segments to keep the composition interesting and give it enough depth. My thought was to frame this middle structure as the focus, and then eventually have smaller buildings that taper off on each side. In the courtyard, I had the idea to make some curved staircases leading up to my entrance. It took some time getting each step into the right place, but I think the result was worth it and provided a much more grand and interesting approach to the keep. I would then also repeat this concept on the other side in order to have mirroring staircases. From here, it was just a matter of filling out the remaining blank areas, just different nooks and crannies, and adding a spire here and there to fill out the rest of the structure. Unfortunately, as I neared the end of the build, something that I did notice was that I had so many lanterns active in the project that not all of them were lighting up, particularly the older ones I had placed. I assume this is just a game optimization mechanic where it'll only light so many light sources in order not to crash the performance, but just something to be aware of if you're doing big projects. With the final touches on my castle, I was feeling really good about where it was at. It was a bit intimidating at first, but step by step it kind of came together and formed a truly haunting background to my town, which I really liked. All that was left to do now was to clean it up a little bit. Cue the cinematic.